Okay, now it's time for us to do our first real uh, setup for the module, the Introduction to the Enlightenment. This cultural and historical background material will help you understand better the texts we're going to look at, Swift's text, Voltaire's Candide, and Saikaku. Uh, the way we position the Enlightenment, the way most thinkers position the Enlightenment, is that this period reacts against the Renaissance, where it was believed that the world could be understood if you just had faith, right? God worked it all out, and you understood the world through Scripture. This period boomerangs against that, and we end up with something known as the rise of reason. The world makes sense, the world is rational, and our job as human beings is to use our rationality to understand how the universe works. Right? Reason is a good thing, and reason can create good things. Right? This idea that somehow we could develop this way of understanding the world is something that we still use in all the sciences today. Most importantly, the idea of the scientific method. And you all remember the scientific method, right? 4 steps: observation and description of a phenomenon, formulation of an hypothesis to explain that, use of the hypothesis to predict the existence of other phenomenon, performance of experimental tests, and then rub that up against, slice and dice that against the hypothesis, and then start all over again. This is probably our most lasting remnant of the ideas that come from the Enlightenment. Newton's Principia Mathematica, right? The creation of the calculus, whether you believe it's Newton that created the calculus or Leibniz that created the calculus first, right? This idea of thinking about the world rationally is what comes to us from the Enlightenment. Right? And here is that scientific method, right? This becomes this idea that the world is mechanistic. The world is a mechanical object. Right? You don't need God and you don't need divine scripture to explain the world. What you need is rational thought. The world has order. It's not just chaotic. It's not just random, and it's not put together by design fiat or just because God wanted it that way. It all makes sense. That gets manifested in ideas about the social order as well. How do we get along with one another? Why do laws exist? Laws exist so that there's social lubrication for us. I might want to drive 75 miles an hour down Main Street in Statesboro, and I probably could, but in order to get along with the rest of you, I can't do that. I have to actually obey the speed limit because it's about your safety. And as long as everybody else is following those laws, everybody more or less stays safe. Right? This idea of irrational social arrangements, where we create things that make no sense, means that we get friction, we get problems as we move in between one another. And this then gives rise to the sense of a nation state that becomes larger than just, in Statesboro, right on Main Street, the speed limit is 35, but on the bypass, the speed limit is 55. But we do have a national speed limit, and we do have statewide speed limits, so we start to think larger. In the Renaissance, we think about kind of the way social order got constructed was each landowner set the laws for all the people who lived on his land. And that's kind of the way it worked. And you went to somebody else's land and the laws would be different. The nation state looks for a larger social group, a larger political group that will allow these things to be codified, right? This is believed to be a natural way that human beings react to one another. And it's not that it comes from divinely inspired organization. You know, the notion of the divine right of kings is problematic for the people in the Enlightenment. God didn't create some people to be innately different than other people. God created, and it's not that the Enlightenment denies the existence of God. In fact, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But God didn't say, well, this person has different blood than everybody else, and therefore he or she is born to rule because their father ruled. No, we get the rise of democracy, number one, because people are interested in seeing their commonality with one another. And what's more common, essentially, than one person, one vote in determining how we function as a society. They're also kind of really wary of emotions. Think about the last time your friend started dating somebody new. How did he or she act? Right? Did you see as much as them? Right? Do you make good decisions when you're under the, well, let's say you're under the guise of being in love? Or, the Snickers commercial, right? You're not you when you're hungry? Well, these great emotions, they color our what should be logical thought, right? Spock tells you the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. But if you're under the sway of jealousy or anger or love or pride or 100 other emotions, you may forget that you're responsible for other people as well. Now, here's what the Enlightenment thinkers thought about in terms of God, right? They're not saying that there wasn't a creator. What they said was the universe was created by some God who is this great watchmaker or great clockmaker. He created the universe, gave physical laws, and then kind of wound it up like you'd wind up an old watch, and then walked away. In theological terms, we call that utter transcendence, right? God isn't a part of this universe, but he's left these laws. If I hold my keys out and drop them, let them go from my hand, I can pretty much predict that they're going to go to the thing with the largest mass. That's going to attract them. That happens to be the ground. That happens to be the earth. I could do that 100 times, 100,000 times, 100 million times, and it would always happen. That is a natural law. Our job as human beings is to figure that out, to use the workings of reason to do that, right? And I don't need, because God is utterly transcendent, I don't need clerical authority, so I don't need a bunch of priests or ministers mitigating God for me or explaining God to me. They know just as little or just as much as I do. I don't need divine revelation because I have logic instead, and I don't need to think of things like original sin. We're not all born damaged or broken. We may become that way. It may be the human condition, but that's not because we were created that way. And finally, I don't have anything like miracles, because miracles are suspensions of the laws of physics. It was a miracle that she didn't die in that wreck. No, it was physics that she didn't die in that wreck. It was a miracle that I passed that exam. Well, for some of us that may be more or less a miracle, but it was a miracle that you passed it? No, you did sufficient amount of studying, or you understood enough, or the test was easy enough. Nobody suspended the laws of physics for you to pass that. Right? And that's fundamentally what a miracle is. Enlightenment writers always had these two goals in mind. You're not just reading to be entertained. You're reading to learn something as well. To delight and to instruct is the way that usually gets explained. Think about the difference between your favorite beach reading novel, if you have one, or some short story that you really like to read, or a poem, and, I don't know, your calculus textbook. One, the textbook, is only there to instruct you. It's not going to be cheery reading. It's not going to be funny reading. It's not going to be something that you go through to while away the hours. And the other, that beach reading, that romance novel, that whatever you're watching, right, that's not going to teach you much. It's just there to make you feel happy or make you feel interested or produce an emotion in you or do something, right? It's only there to entertain you. Good literature for the Enlightenment thinkers, and they get this idea from ancient Greece and ancient Rome as well, is that literature, art in general, it's not just literature, right? Art both delights and instructs us. Right? There are rules for how to do that, and rules that for the Enlightenment says have to do with plot and structure and character and style, and they try to imitate those rules that they pull out of Greek and Roman sources. And then kind of finally we have this idea of the great chain of being. The idea is there's a difference between us and the animals, right? We may not be able to articulate it, but we know that there's a difference. And then below the animals, there are plants, and we know that we're different from them too, and animals are different from them, but plants have a lot more in common with each other than they do with animals. And then there's just matter after that, right? So it's easy for us to slice pretty finely there and talk about various levels of being. There are also, in kind of this Enlightenment thought, which it also gets from the Renaissance, that there's also this idea that there are many degrees of variation above human beings as well. And those are spiritual beings. And above that, kind of ultimately, is God, the creator, who is removed from the universe, who is ultimately all spirit. We, as humans, fall right in the middle of this great chain of being, which means that, like the animals, plants, and just matter itself, we're made up of stuff, right? This physical stuff that we call our bodies. But like those spiritual beings above us, the thrones, powers, dominions, angels, archangels, genies, jinns, demons, whatever we want to call them, depending upon your denomination, depending upon your religious beliefs, you call them different things, right? And the creator itself, be it Allah, Yahweh, Jehovah, God the Father, Atman, Brahma, Vishnu, whatever we want to call it, right? That's all the way at the top. And we, as we fit in the middle of that, are a mixture of both matter and spirit. And our job as human beings is to understand that we're a mixture of both spiritual and physical, right? We're naturally a mixture then of vices and virtues, and we use reason to moderate those things. Yes, you may want to do X, Y, and Z, but you know that they're all illegal. So maybe you do A, B, and C, which aren't quite illegal, but they're not really that good. Nevertheless, you still want to do them, right? When your passions get greater control of you, you fall down the chain, and the universe doesn't work as well. And when your intellect gets the best of you, you rise up the chain, and the universe doesn't work as well either. Right? We have a long tradition of that. We call that, in fact, the 7 deadly sins. So Harper's Magazine had this thing back in the 80s, I think it was. They took the 7 deadly sins to 7 different advertising agencies and said, make them fun, make them look interesting. And boy, oh boy, did they ever. Right? Gluttony. Be all you can be. Greed. It's Santa Claus talking about greed. Because aren't we all a little greedy? And isn't there something good about that? Envy. I like this because this is so kind of commentary on the process itself. The advertising firm here who got envy assigned to them were envious of all the other advertising firms who got all the good sins, they say. Wrath, the only emotion powerful enough to both start a war and stop one. Wow, that's pretty profound. One of my favorites here, if the original sin had been sloth, we'd still be in paradise. Right? Sloth, kind of, just absolute laziness. And here, the Pride Council, and if the text is a little complicated to read, you can go to their website and read it all, right? Pride does not go before the fall, right? This is a typical kind of 1950s ad that they're playing with here. And one that might make more sense to us. Any sin that's enabled us to survive centuries of war, death, pestilence, and famine can't be called deadly. Lust. Where would we be without it? Hey. Now, in those list of the 7 deadly sins, we can kind of understand some of them and not understand others. Lust, yeah, that kind of makes sense to us. We get that. Pride, maybe. All right. Sloth, hey, tell me there's not days you don't want to be awake. Wrath, yeah, we can all get angry. Envy, we can all want something somebody else doesn't want, right? Greed, we can all want more than what we have. And gluttony, you know why people are gluttons? Because food tastes good, right? Out of those deadly sins, 6 of those, technically, make us fall down the ladder, down the great chain of being. From here at our middle spot, we fall down because we give in to our bestial passions. But the worst one of all makes us go up, and that is pride. All of them screw up the way the universe functions. Back up here with this watch, let's say we're this cog. Well, if we get out of sync with all these other ones, the universe doesn't function like it should. And any movement away from our spot, away from our place in the great chain of being, certainly makes the universe fall apart. Now, we're going to see this manifested in lots of different things. This focus on reason, the use of intellect, the distrust of emotions, the focus on the scientific method, and the nation state, and kind of these big social groups that make logical sense. We're going to see this throughout A Modest Proposal and Candide, and even a little bit in this Japanese text we're looking at from Saikaku. So when you're finished with this, you should be able to have kind of good background information for the Enlightenment as itself, and for your first paper, which is going to be about demonstrating how the texts we're reading are actually Enlightenment texts.